Hello, this is Alec Kerr, the film critic for the Conway Daily Sun. This week I want to talk about box office, and it's nothing new that Hollywood has become obsessed with tracking the box office, and box office really decides what films get made, because if a movie winds up becoming a hit at the box office, studios are going to start trying to make clones of that film, because they're like, ooh, that worked, we need to try to do that as well. And so right now we have a couple trends going on because of what's been popular in previous years. Right now we're kind of getting flooded with a lot of supernatural love stories because of Twilight, and a lot of fantasy films because of Alice in Wonderland. Alice in Wonderland back in 2010 made $1 billion worldwide. And so in the last couple years we've been getting a lot of fantasy fairy tale films. That's why last year we had not one but two versions of Snow White. We had Snow White and the Huntsman and Mirror Mirror. This year we've had Jack and the Giant Slayer, and just this past weekend Oz the Great and Powerful. What happened with Alice in Wonderland was you had Tim Burton, and so now you have these studios who are getting kind of more visionary directors like Tim Burton and just being like, here, have millions upon hundreds of millions of dollars to go make a film. And you almost can't blame the directors for being like, okay, I'll take that money. And here's the issue though, because these films have huge budgets. Jack and the Giant Slayer had like a $180 million budget. Oz the Great and Powerful had a $200 million budget. And there's nothing wrong with following trends and trying to capitalize on what's seemingly popular. But when you're throwing that much money at a movie, it does become that it needs to do huge money at the box office to make its money back. And in the case of Jack and the Giant Slayer, it really didn't need to cost that much money to make. Jack and the Giant Slayer is a good film, but what makes it work are some of the smaller moments that don't require these big, elaborate set pieces. Jack and the Giant Slayer was put out by New Line Cinema and Warner Brothers, who just put out The Hobbit. You can kind of sense that they're trying to make a new Hobbit almost, because there are elaborate battle sequences that are very similar to Lord of the Rings, very similar to what they were doing in The Hobbit, and it does seem like they're like, we can make a film that is both like a fantasy film like Alice in Wonderland and also get some of that Lord of the Rings Hobbit audience, and it'll be great. And what happened was they got neither. But here's the thing. Jack and the Giant Slayer is still a pretty decent film and deserves to have an audience. But it didn't do huge money in its opening weekend. It did $27 million, about that, and was #1 at the box office, but because it didn't do like $80 million or $60 million, it was dismissed as being a disaster. And then in the following week, it did 62% less, it did a 62% drop. They spent so much time talking about how it did so badly in the first weekend, and it didn't give it a chance to get any sort of positive word of mouth. Like, people that did see it, they almost got, and they liked it, they almost got drowned out by this discussion of, oh, it didn't do enough money at the box office, it must not be good, and so then people didn't go see it. And so I think it's just this vicious cycle. The quality of the film doesn't really become a factor of whether or not it's seen as being quote-unquote good. The deciding factor if a film is successful is if it makes its money. And that becomes what's discussed, not rather the quality of the film. Like last year, Rise of the Guardians was an animated film that I really loved, and I really wanted to find an audience. And it didn't do, once again, it didn't do huge money its opening weekend, and it was dismissed as being a disaster. And the thing is, you need to give some films a chance to build an audience. And what's funny about saying Rise of the Guardians was a flop in its opening weekend is that it was a holiday film. It was a Christmas film. Those films have legs for weeks, and if they hadn't had all this discussion about it, how it wasn't a good film because it didn't make its money, it could have found an audience. And I honestly thought it was one of the best holiday films in recent years, and I think that if that had been the focal point in the discussion, instead of just talking about how it didn't make its money back, it could have found its audience. And it's not doing these films justice. And Maybe Hollywood needs to scale back their budgets so they don't become so fixated on the box office. I'm not really sure. It's very discouraging. Hopefully they can learn the error of their ways instead of just being like, okay, well, we're just gonna have to make we got to throw more money at the screen. That way we can get more people in the seats. It's like, no, just make a really good film. And I'm not saying that some of these huge budgeted films aren't good. In a lot of cases, they are very, very good. But the same token, you could make that same film and have it be just as good for 50 million less, 100 million less. And then you don't have to worry about how much money it makes in its opening weekend. You could give it a chance for it to grow, which is what happened in the past. Those are my thoughts on that for now. Come back next week, next Monday, for another Real Thoughts. Bye.